I like it. Bryan, you ready to dive into the conference breakdown as a whole?
I am. So again, just a reminder how this works. We're going to go 17-1. So we're going to pick the teams we had at the bottom of the standings, work our way up. The way we're going to do it is instead of snaking 17 teams or just one guy talking for as long as it's going to take to get 17-1, we're going to go blocks of 5, go 13-17, and then 8-12, and then 3-7, and then we're going to then reveal who we have in the ACC title game. We're only going to give you guys our prediction for who wins the league. We're not going to give you records. We're not going to give you conference records, team records, any of that, because if we give that away, then it kind of starts giving away kind of who we might have in the playoff. Well, so what we're going to do is we're going to put our record predictions on the message board after our show on Saturday. We'll go in there and have that. But this is also based off a reminder. This is based off who we have based on their record. So it doesn't always mean I think this team is ahead of this team talent-wise. It's just this team has a more favorable schedule sometimes than that team. And so we'll talk about that. So I'll start off and give my bottom 5. Then Trev will give his, and then we're going to get down to work our way all the way up to the top. So for me, Trevor, when I talk about the bottom of the ACC, unfortunately, I have to go with Stanford here. And as we've talked a lot about, we talked about in our Stanford preview last week, too much turmoil, too much turnover for a team that wasn't that good to begin with. And then when you look at their schedule, I just don't think it works out super favorable for them. So I have Stanford finishing at the bottom of my ACC predictions. Next, I actually have Wake Forest, another team that's gone through a lot of change over this season. Dave Clawson is retired. They've hired a new coach who came from Washington State, did a nice job at Washington State, but inherits a very rough roster. And there's some talent at a couple spots, but overall, they have a pretty rough schedule this year. And the other thing too, Trevor, is their schedule this season. Also, I don't think Wake Forest has the second worst team in the ACC. I think they're bottom 5 in talent, but I think their schedule is what does it for me. They have to play. They have NC State, Georgia Tech, and SMU at home, which I'm kind of like you'd almost want to play those teams on the road because they're probably going to beat you. But they also have to play at Virginia Tech, at Florida State, at Virginia, and at Duke. It is a very challenging schedule for them this year. So I have them 16. I actually think they have a better roster than Cal. But again, schedule-wise, I think it works out a little bit better for Cal. I think another team, like there's just turmoil with all these bottom 3 teams. Just a lot of roster turnover, some coaching changes with the bottom 2. I think Cal just has enough high-end talent, and the schedule sets up favorable enough that they're going to win a couple games, in my opinion, just because teams have to go cross-country that aren't used to going across country. And we saw that last year in the Big Ten with Washington and UCLA and Oregon and, of course, USC. So I got Cal next to 15. Then number 14 for me, this one surprised me, Trevor, when I did my predictions, because I would tell you Virginia Tech has a better than 14th best roster. But there's just they have too many personnel losses, too many transfers, too many young guys that are unproven, but then also just a really rough schedule. This is another team whose schedule really has an impact on why I have them this low. They have to play at NC State, at Georgia Tech, at Florida State, at Virginia, and then they've got home games against Miami, Louisville, and that's just going to be tough. The only games that I look at are like, okay, surefire wins. They obviously have Cal at home, and they have Louisville at home. But the rest of their ace in Wake Forest, not Louisville, Wake Forest at home. Outside of that, it's going to be tough sledding for them to win a bunch of games in the ACC, and especially so like the bottom 3 are significantly lower than everybody else. There's one upset away from you going from 14-9, the way that my predictions finished in the rankings. So I have Virginia Tech 14th. They're a team that I think is going to potentially surprise me, but it all depends on how does Kyron Drones play this year. Can he be more consistent? That's the biggest key for them. If I had confidence Kyron Drones could be a steady player year after year, game after game, then I'd move them up. But he has some games where he is lights out and has some games where they could lose to Stanford and Cal, like the way he'll play. So he's going to have to be more consistent. And then number 13 on my ranking, Trev, is the North Carolina Tar Heels. They have a talented roster in spots, but they're a big unknown for me. Their schedule's somewhat challenging. but I just think North Carolina this year is not going to be what some people think they're going to be. Their roster's not great. They're asking a quarterback to make them an undersized quarterback to make them move from the G5 level. He's a nice player, but there's some good quarterbacks in this league this year, Trevor, and I don't know that he moves the needle a ton for them. So I've got North Carolina as my number 13 team in my preseason ACC predictions.
Yeah, I like those. I mean, we're going to have a lot of consistencies, especially 15 through 17. We have the same teams listed there. But getting into mine, my 17th team it's actually Wake Forest. Man, I know especially after the Stanford preview, I was kind of thinking about it, but the way that the schedule shakes out, I think Wake Forest, to Brian's point, I don't love their in-conference schedule. But the thing that set it apart for me, I thought Stanford had a lot of incoming transfers. Wake Forest said, I see you, Stanford. Let me do you one better. They brought in 35 incoming transfer portal players after losing 27. You compound that with a first-year head coach at Wake Forest, I think that could get real messy real quick, especially when you think of, they're on the road against Florida State, on the road against Virginia, on the road against Duke. You get Georgia Tech, you get NC State, and that could be a very slippery slope for them in the ACC. So I have Wake Forest as my 17th team. Stanford is my 16th team for all the reasons that Brian discussed, for everything that we discussed. The roster's not great. The internal turmoil with that program is rough. Just hired an athletic director, have an interim head coach, and then still a host of transfer portal players that they're relying on. So not expecting a whole lot from the Cardinal this year, unfortunately, because they are also on Notre Dame's schedule. We talked a lot about, the ACC kind of needing to pick up their game. I think Stanford is the farthest away from returning to what they were in comparison to us talking about Florida State and Miami and Clemson getting back to the dominant team they were. I think Stanford has the farthest to go. So they are my 16th ranked team. And then my 15th ranked team, Brian and I see that the same. It's Cal. A lot of different turnover with their team. They lost, at one point this offseason, they didn't have a running back on their roster because they all transferred. That was quickly figured out, and they brought in a transfer, but all 5 of their scholarship running backs transferred between the winter portal and the spring portal. They got decimated with it. Oh, it is.
I've never seen an entire position group leave.
Oh, I haven't. An entire position group is crazy.
Unless it's like your kicker. Like your kicker leaves. Entire depth chart left. How many kids play? 1. Had 1 kicker. Yeah.
We lost all of our kickers. He left.
Well, they're named. It's just 1 kid.
No, I get you. And their schedule doesn't do them any favors either. They're on the road against Boston College. They get at Louisville. They're on the road, or they play SMU as well. They play Duke. So I think Cal's going to have a rough go at it this year. That one is more for kind of talent on their roster as well for what they lost. My 14th ranked team, and this one was a little interesting, but I have Syracuse as my 14th ranked team. When I was going through, and I believe I did the prediction show with them, or their opponent preview show with Vince. And that was kind of when I got my first look at what Syracuse's conference schedule was and just what their overall schedule was going to be. And I don't love it. They're on the road against Clemson. They host Duke. They're on the road against SMU. They get Pitt. They get Georgia Tech. They're on the road against Miami, and they also get Boston College. You compound that with the fact they lost 4 of their top 5 pass catchers. They're in the middle of a quarterback battle right now, and it's between 2 people who I don't know if they're going to be able to repeat Kyle McCord's production. Yeah. You lose some impactful transfer portal impactful players to the transfer portal. One of them being Murad Watson, who's now at Texas. The other one being Trevor Pena, who's now at Penn State. You combine all that with their inability to run the football. They had an 1,000-yard rusher last year, but that didn't stop them from ranking 93rd in the country in rushing offense.
Because it's like when Notre Dame got 1,000 yards from Darius Walker. Like, he's the only guy that carried the ball.
Exactly.
So it's like, yeah, he's a good back, but overall your running game is not that good.
Mm-hmm. So Syracuse, how it shakes out, I don't know if when you watch them play, this was one of the cases for me that I think how they perform in games would put them higher than the 14th ranked team. I just don't love their schedule, and you compound that because I love Fran Brown as a head coach, which leads me to think that out of some of those games, they might sneak out a win in there. But then I also think back to, this was also a team that lost to Stanford last year, kind of out of nowhere. And so I don't know what that's going to look like with the talent of this roster. So I have
And lost to
Syracuse at
Boston
14.
College kind of out of nowhere. Yeah.
Yep.
They are
And
also
then
a victim of their own success, Trev, because they did so well last year. All of a sudden, their roster starts getting picked apart by teams willing to spend a lot of money on those individual players. Yeah.
My 13th ranked team is the Virginia Cavaliers, and I have them there. I'm not overly in love with the talent that they have on their roster. They have some good pieces, but then it comes down to their schedule. They're on the road against NC State, opening up conference play on the road against an NC State team that Bryan and I both believe to be much improved this year. I think that's going to be tough. They obviously lost an important piece in Malachi Fields. We know where he's at right now. Quarterback play is going to have to take a step up. Their defense is going to have to take a step up. And when you open conference play against CJ Bailey and their host of skilled talent, I think that's rough. They also get Louisville on the road. They have to travel out to Cal. Now, they are benefited by the fact that they also have Cal, Wake Forest, and Stanford all on their schedule.
Yeah.
And so that's going to help them out quite a bit. But, I don't love what some of their other conference games are. So I have them at 13th.
So let's go to 12-8. And I have the Cavaliers 12. So we're not that far off, Trev. And here's what I actually like about Virginia. And I actually think if I'm wrong on them, there's a chance I could be wrong and they finish even higher, partly because of what you were just talking about. They have a schedule that's a lot more favorable than some other teams on there. You mentioned they play at NC State. They play at Louisville. Those are both tough games that I think are likely losses. You look at Stanford at home. They get Florida State at home. They get Wake Forest at home. And they get Cal on the road. That's a winnable game. And then if they get Virginia Tech at home, and then at Duke is a winnable game as well if they can get better quarterback play and their offensive line play. They made some really important pickups in the portal this year on the offensive line, on top of having a couple pretty good players coming back. I like their receiving core. It's surprisingly good despite losing Malachi Fields. It's deep. It's steady. There's nobody on Malachi's level, but there's some solid players there. They have a dynamic running back in Xavier Brown. And they have a lot coming back on defense in the front seven, which I think is important. And they got a transfer from out of the portal named Devin Neal. He made the mistake of leaving Louisville after 23 and going to Baylor. And he got hurt. It didn't work out for him. He's a really good player. And I wish he would have stayed in Louisville. But he's now at Virginia. He knows the league. He's a talented player. But as you said, it comes down to, can you get good quarterback play? And when I look at that, I think that's the biggest key to them. They were a 5-7 team last year, Trevor, and you lost a close game to Louisville. They were playing with Clemson for a while. Clemson pulled away late. There was a couple other games where it's just like your quarterback play was so bad that you were out of the game before you could blink. And they go out into the portal and they get a quarterback in Chandler Morris, who's a good football player. He's obviously Chad Morris' son, so he knows football. He's a coach's kid. Last year at North Texas, he passed for over 3,700 yards, 31 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. He transferred from North Texas. He's a kid that was a TCU before that, struggled to stay healthy. This is a guy that beat out Max Duggan at quarterback in 2022 on that TCU team that went and played for the national championship, but he got hurt in the first game of the year. And so he kind of, bounced back from that. So he's shown he can play at the Power 5 level. This isn't a guy that's never been at that level. He's only at North Texas for 1 year. And I think he's a good quarterback, good coach's kid. But here's the thing. It's kind of like Michigan. Just a good, solid quarterback is significantly better than what they had last year. And their quarterback play was so terrible last year, Trevor, that it just made them overall as a team look worse than they were. And I think Chandler Morris coming in helps solidify that and helps that team be better. And then, of course, like their schedule, I think that helps Virginia. They're a sleeper team for me. Number 11 on my list is Syracuse for all the reasons you talked about, Trevor. Way too much roster turnover. Quarterback roster turnover, offensive line roster turnover, receiver roster turnover. And where you had a quarterback last year that was a transfer, but he was a transfer who threw for over 3,000 yards in the Big Ten the year before and led his team to the Cotton Bowl that season. So a kid that went into Notre Dame Stadium and made the throws on that final drive to beat Notre Dame. And now you're going to two kids that have got talent, but two kids who have combined one career start between Steve Angeli and Ricky Collins. So, And then, of course, their defense wasn't that good last year, and they lost most of their top players from the defense. So combined, the losses combined with a really rough in-conference schedule is why I have Syracuse down at 11. Number 10 for me is the Duke Blue Devils. I'm not as high on Duke as other people. There's a couple reasons why. I think they have a good roster. I'm not as high on Darian Menson as others, but I think he could be better than what they had last year. I was very disappointed in the season that Malik Murphy had at times. I thought he flashed some good things for at times, but then he also he would make some bad turnovers. I mean, they were beating Duke, and then he just has Miami, and then he just has some awful turnovers in the second half that cost that team some games. But when I look at Duke, Trevor, and I really break them down, I see a team that's not great offensively. I see a team that won, in my opinion, with a lot of smoke and mirrors last year. I don't know that their success is they can replicate it. You talk about a team that barely beat Northwestern, a team that barely beat UConn, a team that beat North Carolina by a point. They beat Florida State by a touchdown, and in that game, Florida State gave them 2 touchdowns in that game. And I remember watching that, being at a hotel on the road for Notre Dame, watching that. I think it was the week that Notre Dame played. It was the week they played Georgia Tech, I think. Then you lose to SMU by a point, so that was a close loss. Then you have a win over NC State where you pull away late, beat Virginia Tech by 3, beat Wake Forest by 6. Like, there was a lot of those games where I just didn't think they played great. I just thought the team they played was bad. And that's Duke was one of the least impressive 9-win teams I saw last year. They just, in my opinion, they were. And so I don't know if you can replicate that. Now, they've got some good transfer portal pickups, and they're recruiting a high school level pretty well. But their schedule being what it is, and the fact that I just don't really love that roster, and I think they were a little bit of a kind of caught some breaks last year. I think they're a team that takes a little bit of a step back this year, and I have them finishing 10th in that league. Number 9 for me, Trev, is Boston College. This is a team that, depending on how a couple things go, could slide down or potentially slide up. And BC's an interesting situation because we don't know who their quarterback's going to be, and that always gives me pause. But the way I look at it is if Bill Bender, I have to call my guy Bill that I said his name instead of Bill O'Brien. But if Bill O'Brien can win 7 games last year with Thomas Castellanos, who's a terrible fit for his system, or the guy who may start for him this year, then I think they've got a shot. And when you looked at BC last year, Trev, and I look at how they performed down the stretch with Grayson James, a quarterback, and you say, boy, that offense started to kind of figure some stuff out late in the year. Finished the year 3-2. The bowl game was a weird, ugly game, but a 5-point loss in Nebraska. Beat North Carolina convincingly, beat Pitt convincingly, beat Syracuse, barely lost to Louisville. Like the team they were winning like by almost 20 at one point that time of the game. The BC team we saw the last 6 games of the year after the Castellanos changeover was very different. And if Grayson James gets beat out by Dylan Lonergan, I'm going to like them even more. But they've got a quality secondary. They've got legit skill players at wide receiver. The big question marks I have for them are along the lines, which is usually a strength for Boston College. So if they can figure that out, I think BC's got a chance to be a sneaky good team this year. Their schedule sets up favorably. They get both Stanford and Cal. They're at Stanford. They're home against Cal. They get SMU at home, Georgia Tech at home. So I think they're capable of pulling off some upsets. And then you got obviously at Syracuse, at Louisville, at Pitt will be tough games. But they can beat those teams. And so I'm a little higher on BC than I definitely was last year. I thought Bill O'Brien was a bad fit for them and for those quarterbacks, but they're going to bounce back a little bit. And then you got number 8, the Florida State Seminoles, probably the hardest team I had to project because they're basically a brand new football team. But I look at it and I'm like, okay, the talent is still pretty good. Not as good as it was a couple years ago, but it's still good. And there's still good football players on that team, Trev. And I look at them and I think that they're at least good enough. And the schedule sets up well enough that I think that this team has a little bit of a bounce back. I mean, that's still 8th in the league. But the concern I have is I'm very worried about their defensive line. That's the area where it could sink them. If their defensive line struggles, then I think they could struggle and finish in the last group, the 13 to 17 group. But I think their offense is going to be good enough to get them back on track. They're going to need Thomas Castellanos to stop talking and start playing more, because he's a let's leave it at that. But I don't really know what to expect from Florida State. But when I look at their schedule, Trev, I see enough on there, like enough favorable aspects to it to say I think their schedule helps them. You know, they play Virginia on the road, they get Pitt at home, they get Wake at home, they get Virginia Tech at home. They play at Stanford, which is certainly a game they can win. Obviously, at Virginia Tech or at Clemson and at Virginia or at NC State are going to be tough games. They get Miami at home. So I just think overall their schedule is set up favorably for them to have a nice bounce back. And I think he made good coordinator hires this offseason as well. So I do expect a little bit of a bounce back from the Seminoles. They won't be as good as they were 2 years ago. Won't be as bad as they were last year. They'll be somewhere in the middle.
I like it. I like it a lot. My number 12 team, and there's not much variance here, but it's the North Carolina Tar Heels. I think, Brian, you had them at 13th, and I have them at 12th. And
we
it's for
basically
all the reasons.
North Carolina and Virginia.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's for all the reasons that you talk about, man. I don't love their roster. On top of, I just don't love the Bill Belichick hire. So when you compound those two things together, yeah, I'll say this. Their schedule gets helped out by the fact that they get Cal, Syracuse, Stanford, and Wake Forest. And so they're a team that could be a little higher than, 12th, 13th, maybe because of who their opponents are. But it's just one of those that I just don't know what to expect from them, truly. And so I have them at 12th. Again, it goes down to the talent on their roster and their coaching hire. My 11th team is Boston College. And this one could be one that I look back and regret on having them at 11th. Because it's going to depend on who they put at quarterback. I think Dylan Lonergan raises their ceiling a little bit. I love Turbo Richard at running back. I love Lewis Bond and all the receivers that we've talked about this offseason. But I don't love some of the opponents that they get. To Brian's point, they're winnable games. But when you look at it in a vacuum, they're on the road against Pitt. They host Clemson. They're on the road against Louisville. And they get SMU and Georgia Tech. That is a tough ACC slate. But winnable games for Boston College, not so much in the light of how I talked about Syracuse, where they have those opponents, and I don't think they can compete to the level that Boston College can. I think for me, the biggest thing it comes down to is, are they going to be able to generate pressure on defense like they can? They got some good pieces coming back, but I think Donovan, and I'm going to butcher his last name, Ezerikow, leaving, I think is going to play a pretty big factor. We're talking about somebody who had 20 and a half tackles for a loss last season. The next closest player had 7.
Crazy production.
I mean, 20 and a half tackles for loss, 16 and a half sacks, and the next closest person had 3.5. And so if they're defensively, if they're not able to generate enough pressure, that does give me pause about their defense a little bit. I'm confident in Bill O'Brien as an offensive head coach, but it is a young, skilled position group with an inexperienced quarterback going in, whether it's Grayson James or it's Dylan Lonergan. I don't know if you want them getting into shootouts every single week. And so that's going to be an interesting part to Boston College's success, but they do have the pieces there. And with Bill O'Brien going into year 2, they could be higher. It would not shock me in the slightest. At number 10, I have Virginia Tech. And this is a team where I love the talent on their roster, but to Brian's point, what he talked about earlier, they have a really, really tough in-conference schedule. They're on the road against NC State. They're on the road against Georgia Tech. They play Louisville. They're on the road against Florida State. They also get Miami, and they're also on the road against Virginia. Now, it does help them that they play Cal and Wake Forest and Virginia. I think that helps them a little bit. But I think that there's going to be a game or two where the talent on the roster kind of shines a little bit and they sneak up on somebody. Last year, I believe, last year they beat Georgia Tech 21-6. And it could be a similar situation where they sneak up on a team that might not be expecting them a little bit. But again, I think it's going to have to be at home because I think their road schedule is pretty tough. I don't know if I see them winning at Florida State. I very well could because we don't know what Florida State's going to be this year. But you're also on the road against NC State and on the road against Georgia Tech, which I think is going to be rough for the Hokies this year. Number 9, I have Florida State. Now, I think they are going to be helped out a little bit by their schedule because you go through and you look at who they have, and Florida State has on the road against Virginia, on the road against Stanford, they're home against Wake Forest. I don't love that they end the season on the road against NC State, but I also think Florida State's going to be helped out by the fact they don't leave the state of Florida until the 1st of November. And so I
Them
think
and
that's
Miami
also,
both, man. It's crazy.
which is wild. Maybe it's Miami is the team that I'm thinking of that doesn't. I know one ACC team did.
They only leave twice. It's Stanford and Virginia. That's
Okay.
it. They're home against
Okay.
Bama, home against East Texas, home against Kent State, home against Miami, home against Pitt. So 5 of their first 7 games are at home, and they have 2 byes. So their third road game doesn't come until November 8th.
Okay.
They're on the road 3 times in November.
Good Lord. I mean, so I go through and I look at Florida State, don't know what to expect. Again, it's a completely new outlook team. I doubt Mike Norvell goes 2-10, but then I also doubt he goes 13-1. And when you have that wide of a margin, I don't know where they fall. And so I'm putting them kind of smack dab in the middle of the conference, mostly because I do think they are helped out by what their schedule is. At Virginia, at Stanford, home against Wake Forest. I would be surprised if they didn't come away with wins in those games, because of what the roster makeup looks like for some of those programs. But I have Florida State as my 9th team. At number 8, I have the SMU Mustangs. Now, this one was an interesting one for me because I don't think they repeat the same success that they had last year. I think they lost some key pieces on offense. I think losing Brashard Smith is going to be an impact for them. Their running back from last year, he was a dynamic playmaker, but I look at their schedule. They get Louisville. They are on the road against Clemson. They get Miami. They're on the road against Boston College. So don't love those. But then again, they're also at home against Syracuse. They're at home against Stanford. They're on the road against Wake Forest. And they also get Cal. So when you get Cal, Stanford, and Wake Forest in your conference schedule, I kind of like those odds for SMU to walk away victorious in some of those. It's going to come down to what Kevin Jennings does in big moments, because we've seen an inconsistent sample size from him. First half against Clemson, not great. Second half against Clemson, he lit it up. And then we all know what happened against Penn State. So I think SMU's success is going to come down to how does he perform against Clemson? How does he perform on the road against Boston College? How does he perform against Miami? It's going to be interesting for me. I could see SMU moving up these rankings a little bit, but right now I have them at number 8.
That's one of the ones that we have the biggest disagreement on so far. We'll get to that here in a little bit, but I'm going to throw a little curveball, and we're going to both have to answer this question, but I'll ask you first, Trev, because we're in your section. Who are the 1 or 2 teams that you see in this list that you think have the best shot to jump up in the rankings? Not go from 9 to 7 or 11 to 8, but like 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th to top 5 in the league.
Mine are probably just in this chunk that you see right here. I mean, between
that's what I meant from this group, this group.
SMU and Boston College.
Okay.
Honestly, I mean, I love the talent on what Boston College has on their roster. Just quarterback questions, to your point, Brian, always make me a little iffy of vaulting somebody up until I see it. And then with SMU, they have a track record in 1 year in the league of having success in it. SMU comes over, and in 1 year, they're in the conference championship. And so those are probably my 2 teams that I could see vaulting up very quickly.
I'm with you on BC. My other's Florida State. I could see Florida State being up 5 spots. I could see Florida State being down 5 spots. They are incredibly difficult to evaluate, but there is talent there. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes me think they could have that bounce back year. If their D-line is any good at all, I think this team could be a lot better. Let's go here next to my next 5, Trev, numbers 3 to 7. I have the NC State Wolfpack number 7. And honestly, I wanted to put them higher. There's a couple reasons why I didn't put them higher. We've talked about this. I love their quarterback. Love their wide receiving core. I think their offense this year could be really good. A couple things that hurt NC State. I have some questions about their defense. It was really not good last year and really struggled last season. I also don't think their schedule their schedule's kind of middle of the road. They've got some wins, some potentially not easy wins, but winnable games on there. You get Virginia at home, you get Virginia Tech at home, you get Georgia Tech at home, you get Florida State at home, you get North Carolina at home, you get at Wake, at Duke, and then at Pitt, at Miami. So it's a pretty favorable schedule. But really, what it boils down to for me is Dave Doran's got to show me that he can get this thing turned around and that they can get their defense playing better football. Because I thought the biggest disappointment of their team last year. I don't consider their offense a disappointment because your starting quarterback got hurt and you played a freshman the rest of the year and your offense had some good moments. Their defense was abysmal last season. Gave up almost 30 points a game. You give up 51 to Tennessee, 59 to Clemson. You give up 34 to Wake Forest, who wasn't even good. You give up 30 to North Carolina, whose offense wasn't good. You give up 30 to Georgia Tech, 29 to Duke, 28 to Stanford. The defense was incredibly disappointing last season. And that's going to have to get a lot better. And I need to see it to believe it because I like the talent. I don't love the talent on defense. That's the thing that holds them back, in my opinion. Number 6 on my list is the Louisville Cardinals. Now, keep in mind that, so for me, 3 to 6 all had the same exact conference record. So I had to get into some tiebreakers and who beat who and those type of things. So I have Louisville number 6. I could absolutely see Louisville being higher. And everything I just said about NC State applies to Louisville. I could see Louisville playing for the ACC title. I could see Louisville finish 8th or 9th, and it all is going to come down to what can Ron English do with the defense. Their offense is going to be one of the 2 to 3 best in the ACC this year, in my opinion, even with Miller Moss, a quarterback who I'm not a big fan of. Number 1, you have one of the best offensive minds in the game. I think their offensive line might actually be a tad better than last year, even though it's a little bit remade. I think their running back room is as good as anybody in the country outside of the one in State College and the one in South Bend. Like, they legitimately have arguably the 3rd best, if not even 2nd best running back room in the country. I don't think they're 2nd best, but I think you could at least have a conversation about it from a depth standpoint. But outside of the top 2, I think they're in that conversation for the next best. And I absolutely love their receiving core. Really like their receiving core this season, Trevor. I look at that football team and obviously getting Colin Lacey back. Now, you're going to need him to stay healthy. That's going to be a big part of this for Louisville. So if Colin Lacey can stay healthy, I think he's going to have a big year. I love the pickup of Dakari Collins from NC State. I think he gives them a big-bodied player on the outside that's good. Chris Bell is a kid that had some really good moments last year. They picked up some transfers for depth. So I think their offense is going to be very good. I do. The concern I have is their defense. If their defense is better, they can win the league. If their defense doesn't get better, then they're going to finish around here, and that's really what it boils down to for me. Number 5 on my list is the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. This is 100%, Trevor, 100% about their schedule. And the fact that the concern I have about their team is they did lose a lot along both trenches from last season. Now, they got some good players coming back, but that's a bit of a question. If Haynes King is healthy, they have a shot to be in the conference championship game. But the thing that hurts them compared to some teams I have ahead of them is their schedule. They get Clemson at home. That's going to be obviously a tough game. They have to go at Duke, at NC State, at Boston College. They also have to play Virginia Tech at home, Syracuse at home, Pitt at home, and then Clemson at home. They also play at Colorado, which is in their non-conference. So it's not like they don't have Miami, they don't have SMU, but there's some really losable road games in there, mixed in there, and that's kind of what separates them with some of the teams that I have ahead of them. Like, for example, I have the Pitt Panthers at number 4. And as I said before, I think these teams are somewhat interchangeable. But what I like about Pitt is I think their offense is going to be better this year because you're going into year 2 of the Cade Bell era. If you can keep your quarterback healthy, I think their O-line will be a little bit better, but they've got really good skill talent and a really good big-armed quarterback. Their defense is the thing that I have more confidence that Randy Bates and Pat Narduzzi are going to get that defense going than I do Ron English, for example, or the new first-year D coordinator at NC State. Georgia Tech's interesting because my concerns with them is I loved their D coordinator last year in Tyler Santucci, but now they're back to a first-year guy. Now, they went and got a guy that everybody loves, the kid from Texas that was their secondary coach, but he's a first-year coordinator at a new place. It's not like if Mike Mickens were promoted at Notre Dame where, okay, a guy that's been in the system is now being promoted. This is a guy coming from outside the system that's now being promoted to being your defensive coordinator, which gives me a little bit of pause about how much can he get the defense better? I don't know that. I got to see it first, but I do have faith that Randy Bates and Pat Narduzzi can get that defense back on track. So I have Pitt number 4. I think Pitt's schedule is also a little bit more favorable than Georgia Tech. So although they do play Georgia Tech gets Pitt at home. So that's something that could factor into, the rankings being a little bit different. But I actually, prediction-wise, I went with a little bit of an upset on that one and picked Pitt to win that game just because I think the matchup is, I think that Pitt defense can with their speed can match up a little bit better against Georgia Tech. And Georgia Tech also just has that one game a year at least where they just like, how the heck did they lose that game? And that's the one I have this year. And then with Pitt, their schedule, they get Louisville at home, they get Boston College at home, they get NC State at home, they get Miami at home. So like the best teams they play outside of Georgia Tech are all at home. They do have to play at Florida State. They do have to play at Syracuse. They do have to play at Georgia Tech, which aren't going to be easy. But the real good teams they play this year, they get at home. And I think that in conference, and that's going to help them. Number 3 on my list is the Miami Hurricanes. I think Miami's going to be just like they were last year, a team that is pretty good, but just not quite good enough to win the league. And, and part of this comes down to schedule, Trev, but I do have some questions about, if you have a first-year coordinator, how Carson Beck is going to fit in. I have some questions about their secondary. I mean, their secondary's got some major question marks. Their receiving core is a major question mark. So, and then how's Corey Heatherton going to do as the D coordinator? Yeah, he did a nice job at Minnesota last year. I believe that's his only year as a defensive coordinator at the P4 level. So that's still a little bit of a question mark for me. The other part is their schedule's challenging. They have to play at Florida State. They have to play at SMU, at Virginia Tech, and at Pitt. And so when I compare them to my number 2 team, it's a much favorable schedule. And then some of their home games are going to be tough too. They get Louisville at home, which is not going to be an easy game to win. They get Syracuse at home, who beat them last year, and then they get NC State at home, which is a very dangerous game for them. It's a trap game for them, and the same reason that it's a trap game for Notre Dame, which is it's right in between Syracuse, and they're going at Virginia Tech. And then, of course, they end the season in 2 cold weather environments, which for Miami could be in late November, could be challenging. But you could argue that Miami has the second best roster in the league, but they don't have the second most favorable schedule in the league. And that's why I have the Hurricanes number 3.
Switching gears back over for my number 7 team, I have the Duke Blue Devils. And very similar to what Brian talked about last year about how they just kind of had the most boring 9-win season of all time. I think that's just kind of what they're going to do this year. I think they're in conference. I think they're going to beat the teams that they're supposed to beat. And I think they lose to the teams that they're probably supposed to lose to. I look at their schedule. They get NC State, they get Georgia Tech, they get Clemson. But again, they're also helped out by the fact that they also get Cal, they get Wake Forest, they get Syracuse. And so I think that they're just going to be a run-of-the-mill, kind of above middle of the road, if not middle of the road ACC team. Duke is one of those teams that it would not surprise me at all if they slide out of the top 7. But for me, a lot of it just comes down to their schedule and who they have. I'm not in love with the talent on their roster. I think they're a well-coached football team. That's how they managed to win some of those games that they had last year. So yeah, I have them at number 7. When we get into my number 6 team, these are the team like 3 through 6, 4 through 6 are pretty interchangeable, but I do have Miami. I'm not as high on Miami as what others are. You guys are well aware of that. I don't think they're going to be 4-8. I don't think they're going to be Florida State. I also don't think they're the number 10 team in the country right now. I think they've lost way too much. I do. You lose Cam Ward, who is the number 1 overall draft pick in the NFL. You lose an 1,000-yard running back, and you also lose your top 5 pass catchers from last season. That is a lot to replace in one offseason. And the transfer portal quarterback you bring in has health problems and developed a little bit of a turnover problem in 2024 that he didn't really have in 2023. And so I look at that. I do like the talent in their trenches. I do. I think that they're going to succumb a little bit to, like, they're going to be a victim of their own schedule a little bit. The fact that they don't leave the state of Florida until November 1st, I think is going to hurt them because their final conference games, you got NC State at home, then you travel to Virginia Tech, and then you also travel to Pitt. Those are their final 3 conference games. Those are going to be tough road games, and you're going to play in environments that is very different from Miami, Florida in November. Very, very different. I also think them hosting Louisville early in the year, I think Louisville's going to remember a little bit of that game from last year, that 52-45 loss at home.
Louisville gave that game away, Trevor, 100%.
Mm-hmm. So I think there's going to be a good amount of players on that team that are going to kind of remember what happened last year, and they're going to walk into that game a little bit of your chip on your shoulder of, okay, did Miami, the program, beat us, or was it the fact that you had Cam Ward and he threw for like 5 passing touchdowns that game and Damian Martinez went for like $180 or something? So what's really the real Miami here? So I have them finishing 6. I could see them going higher. I don't really see them going lower. I'll say that about Miami. I think
that's their floor. Without a doubt, that's their floor.
I think that they have some of the most room to rise up inside of the top 4-ish.
I think they can win the league. If everything clicks, I think they can win the league. So agree. They have a high ceiling, but I do agree that's their floor. if they finished worse than 6, it was a bad year for them.
Yep.
A really bad year.
I do not see them going below 6. My number 5 team, the Louisville Cardinals, for a lot of the reasons why you talked about. There's 2 things that it comes down to. I'm not going to echo too much about the defense. I don't know how much I trust Ron English. Their schedule's like relatively favorable, honestly. I mean, you get Cal, you get Virginia, but then you also get Pitt on the road, you get Clemson, you get SMU on the road. I think there could be a little bit of upset action there, but who knows? It's kind of how it played out on my little notepad conference breakdown here. But I'm also not super confident in Miller Moss. I've said this a lot this offseason, and if there's one thing that Lincoln Riley can do, it's develop quarterbacks. I don't know if he can lead a team. I don't know if he can lead a program. I know he can develop quarterbacks. Miller Moss had a little bit of a turnover issue last year. That's why he went away from Miller Moss, and he was the first quarterback under Lincoln Riley's tutelage that had those turnover issues. He's going to another genius offensive mind in Jeff Brom. Can he be the one that helps turn that around? Potentially. I'm not closing the door on that at all, but I'm going to be very interested to see what he does with those. Now, the pieces around what he's going to have are great. Top 3 running back room in the country, in our opinion. I love their receiving core. They replaced Ja'Cory Brooks with the NC State kid that's coming in, another big-bodied guy.
Yeah.
Yep. So,
well, you could even argue that they're replacing Ja'Cory Brooks with Colin Lacey.
Yeah.
Like just because he was out for so much of the year last year.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah.
But between the defense and Miller Moss is a big question mark to me. If he can he can go and keep them in games. If he's sharp, he can also play them out of games if he gets turned over.
If he could play against Ron English's defense every day, he might win the Heisman.
I was about to say, he might be lighting it up in fall camp right now for all we know, because we'll see.
That doesn't tell us a whole lot, because I think the last time he played against a Ron English defense, what did he throw, like 6 or 7 touchdowns or something like that? It was absolutely nuts, but that was in the bowl game. I was actually watching that game in the airport, Trev, and it was kind of funny watching that game play out, because you're just like, this Louisville, like, what happened to this team? Like, they were really good at times.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Miller Moss against Louisville. You want to know why Bobby Petrino went after Miller Moss? Because when he faced him in the ball game 2 years ago, he went 23 of 33 for 372 yards, 6 touchdowns, and a pick against Ron English's defense. So, yeah. But to your point, Trevor, I mean, he had 4 games last year over 300 yards. Yeah. Had another game of 293 yards, had another game of 283 yards. The problem is that in those 9 starts, he also threw 9 picks. Yeah. Like that, like to your point, like, he can produce. It's just the turnovers were and it wasn't just the number of turnovers, it was when he would turn the ball over. It was crushing at times.
It was the crucial moment. There's a reason why USC had a lead on teams in the fourth quarter, and in every loss that they had, blew those leads in the fourth quarter. Not all because of Miller Moss, but a lot of untimely picks. So if Jeff Brom can get that figured out, Louisville's well in contention to play for the ACC championship. But if the defense and Miller Moss end up kind of on the negative end of that spectrum, it could be a really interesting year. A year similar to last year for Louisville, for sure. When I get into my number 4 team, this one I'm pretty high on. It's NC State, and they are home to my Offensive Player of the Year. Love what CJ Bailey's going to be able to do within that offense. Some of it, honestly, it's kind of just that Dave Dorn effect. When there's not a whole lot of expectations on his plate, that's just kind of the year where it's like, wait, NC State is what right now?
And to your point about expectations, Trev, just looking at the FanDuel betting odds, they have the 8th best betting odds in the league, and they're closer to number 9 than they are number 8. Yeah. Or I mean, number 7. So they're number 8. Florida State's ahead of them at plus 3,100. NC State's at plus 4,000. They're closer to actually Pitt and North Carolina are right behind them at plus 4,500. So to your point, like, the expectations aren't super high for NC State this season, which is right in Dave Dorn's wheelhouse.
I mean, literally, we've seen it year over year. Now, the interesting thing that gives me pause about this is we're also talking about a coach that I don't believe has ever had a 10-win season. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how Dave Dorn kind of compounds the low expectation versus the legitimate top-level talent he has in the ACC. I mean,
certain spots,
CJ Bailey, Justin Jolly. You know, I like some parts of their defense. That's ultimately what it's going to come down to. the success of
And this
NC
is year
State this year.
13 for him, Trev. Year
Yeah.
13 for him, and he's never had a 10-win season. He's had a bunch of
That's
9-win seasons. And to your point, them finishing fourth probably has them at 9 wins again.
Yep.
Especially since they play Notre Dame out of conference.
And they're one of the very few ACC teams that plays 9 conference opponents because they have that rivalry with North Carolina at the end of the year. I thought that was interesting as well. But NC State, it'll be interesting to see how they fare. I have them at the number 4 team right now. Number 3 is Pitt. Now, between my 2 and 3, I think that it's interchangeable, but I really like Pitt. The question comes down to is the health of Eli Holstein and which version of Pitt is the real Pitt.
Yes.
I mean, you start out the season 7-0 and then you finish it 0-6. Are you more of 7-0 Pitt? Are you more of 0-6 Pitt? Or are you somewhere in the middle? Somewhere in the middle puts you in this 3-6 range in the ACC standings.
Mm-hmm.
But being either 7-0 Pitt or 0-6 Pitt, I think dictates whether you're playing for the conference championship or not. The pieces are there. I think they have an underrated receiving core. You and I both think that Desmond Reed is a top 5 running back in the country.
Yep.
I like what Eli Holstein did. He is one of very few quarterbacks that to start last season with 5 straight games with 3 touchdown passes in each game. I mean, he started the season out with 15 touchdown passes and I think 1 or 2 interceptions. And then he ended in the final 6 games, also due to injury, I think with 1 touchdown pass and like 2 picks. And so it was in
the last 7 games, like so in the last 8 games, so first 5 he had 15, only threw 2 touchdowns the rest of the way. To your point, but he played 5 games where he didn't throw he didn't throw a touchdown on 4 of them. And then the only game he got hurt in, like on fewer attempts, is like against Louisville. He only had 5 attempts, but he had time to throw a pick in that game before getting knocked out. Yeah, he had 2 touchdowns and 4 picks in the last 5 games. To your point,
yeah, I mean,
15 and 3 in the first 5.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's tough. I mean, you go and you look at how they ended their season. They climbed their way all the way up into the, I believe, inside of the top 20 of the AP poll, and then they fell out. And so it comes down to who the real Pitt is. Can Pat Narduzzi put it together? He's another seasoned coach in the ACC. If he can put it together, it would not shock me in the slightest if Pitt was playing for another ACC title like they did in 2022 or 21, 22? 21. Thank you. It would not shock me in the slightest. But if they're somewhere in the middle, I could see them kind of being that like 8-4 team that's somewhere in this like 4 through 6 range. But if they can put it all together and Eli Holstein can stay healthy, love the pieces that they have on offense and defense. I mean, Kyle Lewis, Rasheem Biles, love those linebackers. I mean, I think it was I think Rasheem Biles led the team in passes defended and Kyle Lewis led the team in interceptions. And I think both were 1 and 2 for tackles for a loss last year. To Brian's point earlier, they're do-it-all linebackers. I love the pieces that they have.
Yep. So let's get to our championship game picks, Trev, and I'll go first. I've got the Clemson Tigers against the SMU Mustangs. I have a rematch. I didn't want to go with the rematch. I don't believe that SMU would be my number 2 team if I was doing a power ranking. As I mentioned before, they'd be in my top 4, however. But there's a couple reasons why I like SMU to be the opponent for Clemson this year in the ACC championship game. And the biggest one really comes down to schedule. I think that they have a very, very manageable in-conference schedule. They get Louisville and Miami at home. So you've got these teams are going to have to go all the way down to Dallas to play this game. They also get Syracuse at home. They have Stanford at home. They do play at Clemson. Think that's a loss. But their other road games are at Wake, at Cal, and at Boston College, which is a winnable game as well. I mean, you look at their schedule, Trev, and if you want to go back to my bottom 5 teams, which is North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Cal, Wake, and Stanford, they play the bottom 3 teams on the schedule and this year. So I think that the schedule is going to be very, very pro SMU this season, where it's a little bit more challenging for other teams. I also think their offense is still going to be very good. Their offensive line being made over is a little bit concerning for me. That's the one thing I have an issue with. You mentioned, they did lose L.J. Johnson, who left to go to Cal. They should still be okay at running back. They had 3 kids that carried the ball a decent amount last year. The thing that concerns me about Pitt, and if I'm wrong in this, about SMU, and if I'm wrong about this prediction of them being the ACC title game, it won't be because of the offense. It'll be because of the defense. The most underrated part of SMU's football team last year was their defense. They gave up 22 points a game. A lot of that was because they gave up 34 to Clemson and 38 to Penn State at the end of the year. At times, their defense was pretty solid last year, and it was really good in 2023. But they lose. They only have 2 starters coming back off their defense, and that's what gives me pause. And I'd say they are not in my top 2. If I'm just saying who has the best team, take the schedule out of the equation, then SMU's not my top 2. But when you look at a schedule that has Syracuse at home, Stanford at home, at Wake, at Cal, your 2 toughest games, 2 of your 3 toughest games are at home. I think it sets up nicely for SMU to repeat and get back to the ACC title game. I don't feel great about this prediction, but a dynamic quarterback, experienced players coming back, including an experienced quarterback, and a team that's going to be confident that they can go in and compete because they did it last year. Can he keep them hungry, though? Or do they become overconfident? That's a little bit of my question. But I think the thing that he's going to be able to sell this year is, hey, people don't respect us. People have Louisville and Miami ahead of us in the rankings. We beat both of those teams or not Miami, but we beat Louisville last year. We beat that team last year. And they don't respect us. Like, what has Miami done? They didn't do what we did last year. So I think they can kind of play the disrespect card. If you look at the FanDuel conference winning the odds for winning the conference, they have SMU 4th, despite finishing the last regular season 1st. So I think that's going to be a big thing for SMU is the disrespect card a little bit. But disrespect can only take you so far. It can't make you tackle, can't make you read a defense and those type of things. But I just think there's too much skill, too much experience, too much firepower on offense, and a very favorable schedule for me to have them lower than this. But there are probably at least 2, maybe 3 teams that I'd rank ahead of them on my power ranking, but those teams have very different schedules than what SMU has next year or this year. But I have them number 2. My number 1's Clemson. I think the only question for me with Clemson is, are they going to be a national title contender? That's still a big question mark for me. But last year, as down as they were, Clemson still played for the ACC championship. And, you talk about a team, Clemson, they got killed by Georgia, lost to South Carolina. Okay, they still won the league. You know what I mean? For all the issues they had and the ups and downs that they had last year, getting embarrassed at home by Louisville, blowing a game against South Carolina, getting blown out for Georgia, they still won the ACC. They still made 2 and won the ACC. And Dabo, for even during this stretch of years where Clemson hasn't been as good as you'd like them to be from 21 to 24, this is not vintage Clemson. They still won the ACC twice in that stretch. They won it in 24, and they won it in 22, beat North Carolina. So they still won 2 of the last 3 ACC championships despite being down. Well, I think this is going to be their best team since 2020. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to be good enough to play for a national championship. We'll find that out next Saturday. But I still think it makes them the cream of the crop in the ACC because they're going to be better than last year, and they won it last year. You know what I mean? So it's like it's hard for me to go against them. So I'm going with Clemson number 1, my prediction is that Clemson will once again win the ACC, not just get there. So I do have them beating SMU, and I don't think Clemson's a great matchup for SMU. There are other teams on this list. Pitt would be a tougher matchup. NC State and especially Louisville, Georgia Tech, teams like that would be tougher matchups just as far as where SMU is good and where Clemson is good. But I think it's going to be Clemson and SMU, and I have the Tigers winning it.
Love it. I love it. My number 2 team, and if you guys are kind of tracking, by process of elimination, I have my number 2 team being the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Common theme with today, I think Brent Key is going to be the ACC Coach of the Year because he leads them to the ACC Conference Championship game. Here's a little nugget for you, and I know that we're not talking about overall records, but the reason why I said that I wouldn't have any pushback if somebody wanted to flop my 2 and 3, because Pitt is my 3rd team and Georgia Tech is my number 2 team, is I have them at a 1-game difference with the tiebreaker being their final conference game, which is against each other when Georgia Tech hosts Pitt. I think that is going to be a very underrated matchup late in the season that I don't think not enough people are talking about. But I really like what Georgia Tech brings back. I do get nervous, to Brian's point, about their defensive coordinator hire. I really love Santucci last season. You bring in somebody from Texas who was running an SEC secondary, but it was a successful secondary. I'm kind of putting a little bit of blind faith in there of, hey, like what would have not putting him on the same level, but what would have like a Mike Mickens type of position coach done if he went and became a defensive coordinator at a program not as big as Notre Dame? And that's kind of how I view Georgia Tech's hire of the Texas kid. And that's what makes me a little bit more confident in their defense. Lost some pieces. I still like their size up front, but it comes down to their offense. You have Brent Key going into his third year. You have a veteran quarterback coming back, but in the same light as Pitt, can he stay healthy? That's the biggest question. And it's just it was such a weird season for Haynes King last year. I mean, towards the end of the season, Zach Pyron, he played against Notre Dame, and then Aaron Philo was their leading passer in their next 4 regular season games until Haynes King came back against Georgia, and he threw for 303 yards and rushed for 110 in Athens. But, even in the Miami game, he wasn't able to finish, but he went 6 of 6 for 32 yards and a touchdown and had 20 carries for 93 yards and also a touchdown. And so, again, what's the real version of Haynes King that we are going to see this upcoming season? If he can remain healthy, I love their chances. And then you have Jamal Haynes coming back in the backfield. It's going to be interesting to see what Georgia Tech does this year. I know one of their receivers from last year also returns. Malik Rutherford comes back. I think Chase Lane for them also returns. I think he could be in for a good season. And so I have Georgia Tech at number 2 and then Clemson at number 1 for all of the reasons that Brian talked about. I think that they have probably the best roster from top to bottom in the ACC. Mm-hmm. You have a veteran quarterback coming back. I think they have the best receiving core in the ACC, one of the best in the country, one of the most experienced offensive lines. And again, Dabo has been at his best when he has experience and talent in both trenches. And that's consistent with 2015, 2016, 2018, 2019, and 2020. And so I think Clemson and Georgia Tech play for the ACC Conference Championship. And then, Brian, are we predicting winners in this one yet or no?
Yeah, I did. I went with Clemson.
I am also going with Clemson.
What's interesting, Trevor, is I said this in the chat, but I could see Georgia Tech being in it. I actually like Georgia Tech's roster better than SMU's top to bottom. I could see Louisville being in the ACC title game, and I could see Miami being the ACC title game, or really the teams that I could see making it. What's interesting is where I have Pitt. I don't have Pitt as a team that I expect to have a shot to get in. And the reason that I have it that way is because where I have Pitt in my rankings is that's their ceiling. Their ceiling is 4. I don't think I think their schedule's set up to where they could max out at 4, but aren't going to go higher. To your point, like they have to play at, they host Georgia Tech, but Georgia Tech could beat them. You know what I mean? So I could see Georgia Tech being higher. I could see Louisville. I could even see NC State if they put it all together getting here. But I think the reason I don't have Pitt is because I think Pitt's ceiling is 4. That's where, because they're a very veteran team in a lot of places. I don't know that they can get over the hump to get into the title game. I could be wrong on that, but I think the other teams have a better shot at getting in. But Pitt's just solid. I think they're just going to be solid here.
That's where I'm at. Yeah, Georgia Tech is an interesting one, especially when you talk about their schedule. I mean, the key to their success is going to be holding serve at home on the road. Excuse me. On the road, you get Wake Forest. You're on the road against Duke. You're on the road against NC State. And you're on the road against Boston College. Your final 2 road games are going to be significantly more difficult than your first 2 road games. But one of the things that helps them out is in between that, they don't have SMU on their schedule. There's no Miami. There's no Florida State. And there's no Louisville. Starting out the year against Clemson to open up conference play is going to be difficult. But we're going to find out a lot about this Brent Key Georgia Tech team. I'm not expecting them to win that regular season game. But if they are competitive and it looks like what it did against, when they went through and they had some of their close regular season games last year, I go back and think of, what they did when they beat Miami 28-23. If it looks something competitive like that, like I said, I don't know if they walk away with the victory, but if it's competitive, it's going to give me a lot more confidence that this prediction is going to come true. But if they go and they host Clemson, because they do get Clemson at home, and they just get absolutely ran out of the building, not going to feel that confident about putting Georgia Tech at 2. But the pieces on their roster I really, really like. And so it's where we're at, man. It's going to be an interesting year in the ACC.
Here's an interesting thing for you. I actually have Georgia Tech upsetting Clemson this year.
Ooh.
So in my rankings, that would be a rematch and Clemson would have been the team that lost, which I think would make for a very ugly ACC title game for Georgia Tech. I think the payback would be heck. But yeah, that's how I feel about Georgia Tech. There's going to be some dank games this year where I think they're going to look like the best team in the ACC 2 or 3 Saturdays. But I just think there's going to be weeks where they look like, how did they lose that game? Like there's too many teams in the ACC like that, Trevor. Louisville's that way. I think Georgia Tech's that way. I think that NC State's that way, where you're just like, one week you watch them, you're like, man, that's a good football team. And then the next week you're like, who is this? Yeah. Who are these imposters? This isn't the team I watched last week. And that's what I think makes this a very challenging year to predict as well.
Yeah.
But so that's it. So we both have Clemson as the ACC champions in 2025. So 3rd out of 4th years, Clemson is going to win the ACC championship, according to us at Irish Breakdown. And most of the chat. I mean, there's only been a couple people I've seen have anyone other than them winning it.
Yep.
So that's our ACC prediction. That was fun.
Good deal. That was
not
fun.
A lot. Not as, I mean, the only really big disagreement we had was SMU. We were within 2 to 3 spots of each other on most of the other picks, but the SMU one is the one we had very different.
Yep, and it's one of the ones too where I even talked about, like, it would not surprise me if they jumped up.
Yeah.
Like
It's just are you does the 1 year make you a believer or not? That's the challenge. You're like, yeah, it went well last year, but their schedule was incredibly favorable, and there's a lot of things you can kind of spin into it to say, like, okay, I'm not sure how I feel about that one, but yeah, that's where I'm at. Yep.
Well, listen, folks, that is going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. On your way out of here, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. Whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. It helps with the algorithm and all of those things to help gain us a little bit more traction. But the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. The guys are going live tonight at 5 p.m. on IB Nation Sports Beat, so hop over and check them out.
I'll be on at 5:30 talking about Elijah Golden.
There we go. So you guys are going to get a double dose of Mr. Driscoll today. So be sure to hop over
tomorrow, baby.
Sure is. I'm excited for that one. That one's going to be good. Join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. where we preview the SEC conference. Same format of what we did today. But until then, for Bryan, I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.